The verdict and the fateful encounter. The fluorescent lights in Dr. Harrison's office hummed like angry wasps as Andres Montero stared at the MRI scans illuminating the wall, black and white images that spelled out his death sentence with clinical precision. 6 to 8 weeks, Dr. Harrison repeated, his voice distant and hollow. I'm sorry, Andres. The glioblastoma is aggressive. We can discuss palliative care options, but Andres had stopped listening. The words terminal brain cancer echoed in his skull as he stumbled out of the office, his designer shoes clattering on the polished hospital floors like a ticking clock. At 39, Andres Montero owned half of the Manhattan skyline. His real estate empire had made him immensely wealthy, but money couldn't buy him more time. The irony wasn't lost on him. A man who built homes for others would never see his 40th birthday. His hands trembled as he gripped the wheel of his Lamborghini, navigating Brooklyn's late afternoon traffic in a daze. The city blurred past him like a watercolor painting left out in the rain. He should call his assistant, cancel meetings, get his affairs in order. Instead, he drove aimlessly, his mind struggling to process the impossible. Then he saw them. Standing at the Atlantic Avenue subway station, a woman with auburn hair held the hands of 2 identical little boys. Something in her posture, the way they tilted their heads, stole his breath. Andres slammed on the brakes, ignoring the blare of horns behind him. His eyes locked on the children, twins of perhaps 6 years old, with dark hair and familiar brown eyes. His eyes. The woman turned slightly, and his world shattered completely. Elena, but older now, dressed in simple clothes instead of designer dresses. Her hair was shorter than he remembered, and the name on her work lanyard read Elena Reyes. Not Elena Soto, the woman he had publicly humiliated 7 years earlier. As the subway train approached, one of the boys looked directly at Andres through the car window. The child's innocent gaze pierced him like a lightning bolt, and Andres knew with absolute certainty that they were his sons, the children he never knew existed. Andres abandoned his Lamborghini on the curb and rushed toward the subway platform, his heart pounding against his ribs. The evening crowd shoved past him as he pushed his way through, desperate not to lose sight of them. "Elena!" he yelled, his voice cracking. She froze. Her grip tightened protectively on the boy's hands. When she turned, her face had gone ashen as winter snow. The boys looked at their mother in confusion, then at the well-dressed stranger approaching. "You have the wrong person," Elena said quickly, pulling the children closer. "My name is Elena Reyes. I don't know you." But Andres could see the truth in her terrified eyes. Up close, the resemblance was undeniable. The boy on the left had his stubborn chin, while the other shared his thick eyebrows. They were perfect miniatures of the Montero family features. "Don't lie to me, Elena," Andres said, moving closer despite her obvious fear. A sharp pain shot through his skull, making him wince. "Those are my sons." "Mommy, who is this man?" the smaller boy whispered, hiding behind Elena's legs. "Nobody important, Miguel," she replied firmly. Then she looked at Andres with a defiance that burned in her green eyes. "You need to leave us alone now." "I'm not going anywhere," Andres insisted, though another wave of pain made him lean on a nearby pillar. "How old are they, Elena?" 6, 7. That means nothing," she cut him off sharply. "You made your feelings about me perfectly clear 7 years ago. These boys don't know you, and they don't need to know you." The braver twin, Santiago, Andres assumed, stepped forward, studying Andres with curious intensity. "Are you sick, mister? You look pale." Andres knelt slowly, fighting the dizziness that threatened to overwhelm him. "I'm fine, son. What's your name?" "Don't answer," Elena commanded. Then she turned to Andres with ice in her voice. "If you come near my children again, I will call the police. They have a father figure who actually cares about them." The subway train roared into the station, drowning out Andres's reply. As Elena rushed the boys through the doors, Santiago looked back one last time, his innocent eyes full of questions that pierced Andres's dying heart. That night, Andres sat in his penthouse overlooking Central Park, his whiskey untouched, reflecting the city lights. The pain in his head had intensified, but it was nothing compared to the agony in his chest. Those boys, Santiago and Miguel, were his flesh and blood, and he had missed 6 years of their lives. His mind went back to that terrible night 7 years ago, the memory as sharp as broken glass. The Metropolitan Club had been decorated with white roses and golden lights for his engagement party. 200 members of New York's elite mingled in the grand ballroom, celebrating what the society pages called the merger of the century. Elena had looked radiant in her emerald dress, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. She had told him about the pregnancy only hours before the party. 8 weeks, she had whispered with tears of joy in her eyes. But then Andres's business partner, Mateo, had pulled him aside with devastating news. The Hendricks deal, their biggest acquisition, had fallen through because someone had leaked their bid. Mateo's investigation pointed to Elena's access to Andres's computer. "She's been manipulating you, Andres," Mateo had said. "The classic gold digger move. Get pregnant, secure the fortune." Doubt had poisoned Andres's mind like venom. When Elena approached him with champagne, radiant with happiness, something dark had erupted from his chest. "Ladies and gentlemen," Andres had announced, his voice echoing in the silent ballroom, "I'm afraid there's been a mistake. This engagement is off." Elena's face had crumbled in real time. "Andres, what are you?" "I will not be manipulated by a calculating gold digger," he had declared, his words reverberating off the marble walls. "Someone who would seduce me for my money and then sabotage my business." Gasps and whispers had filled the air like a swarm of locusts. Elena had stood motionless, her hand still protectively on her stomach, tears streaming down her face as 200 witnesses watched her world collapse. 3 days later, Mateo confessed. A jealous employee had leaked the information. But by then, Elena had disappeared along with the child she had lost from the trauma. Andres's whiskey glass slipped from his trembling fingers, shattering against the marble floor. He had destroyed the woman he loved and killed his own child with his cruelty. Now, with death rushing toward him, he had discovered that 2 boys had somehow survived his devastating mistake. Part 2. The Race Against Time. For 3 days, Andres stalked the subway station like a waiting ghost. The headaches were getting worse, accompanied by moments where his vision blurred and his hands trembled uncontrollably. But he couldn't give up, not when he had found his sons. On Thursday evening, Elena walked out of the station with the boys, her jaw set with determination when she saw him. "This is harassment," she said coldly, placing herself between Andres and the boys. 5 minutes, Andres pleaded, his voice hoarse. "Just let me talk to them for 5 minutes." Santiago peered out from behind his mother, eyes curious, while Miguel clung tighter to her hand, his little face etched with anxiety. "Please, Mommy," Santiago whispered. "He looks sad." Elena's resolve wavered for a moment, then hardened again. "Fine, 5 minutes, but I am staying here, and if either of my sons gets uncomfortable, you leave immediately." Andres knelt carefully, fighting a wave of dizziness. "Hi, boys. I'm Andres. I knew your mom a long time ago." "Are you the man who made Mommy cry?" Miguel asked suddenly, his voice barely audible. The innocent question hit Andres like a physical blow. He looked at Elena, whose eyes were filled with old pain. "Yes," Andres admitted in a low voice. "I hurt your mommy very, very badly, and I'm sorry for that." Santiago stepped forward protectively. "Then why should we talk to you? Mommy says people who hurt others aren't good people." "Because sometimes," Andres said, struggling to find words a 6-year-old could understand, "people make terrible mistakes, and sometimes they spend the rest of their lives trying to make up for those mistakes." Miguel shook his head violently. "We don't need a daddy. We have Mommy, and she takes care of us." "Time's up," Elena announced, noticing Andres's pale complexion and the way he was grabbing the bench for support. "Boys, say goodbye." "Goodbye," Santiago said politely, but Miguel just looked at the ground. As they walked away, Andres called out desperately, "I just want to get to know you. Please!" Elena turned back, her expression softening slightly at his obvious desperation. "Supervised visit only. 1 hour, twice a week, at Riverside Park, near the playground. And Andres?" Her voice turned stern. "Go see a doctor. You look terrible." Andres watched them disappear into the crowd, hope and desperation fighting in his chest. He had permission to see his sons, but time was running out faster than sand in an hourglass. Andres hired a private investigator within hours of that first supervised visit. The folder that arrived 3 days later held revelations that made his terminal diagnosis feel like a minor nuisance. Elena Reyes, legally changed from Elena Soto, worked 3 jobs. Mornings at Brooklyn Methodist Hospital as a radiology tech, afternoons cleaning downtown offices, and weekends at a local restaurant. Her monthly income barely covered the rent on their small 2-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood where sirens wailed through the night. But the most devastating discovery came in a school report, filed deep in the folder. Miguel had severe dyslexia. The recommended therapy cost $300 a week, money Elena simply didn't have. The boy was falling further and further behind, his confidence crumbling with each failed reading attempt. Andres studied Miguel's school photo, seeing his own childhood struggles reflected in those confused brown eyes. He had overcome his learning difficulties with expensive tutors and specialized programs. His son didn't have that luxury. The final revelation came when Andres followed them to the park for their second supervised visit. He arrived early, hiding behind a tree to observe them naturally. "Tell us about Daddy again," Santiago was saying to Elena as they sat on a bench. Elena's voice was soft but sad. "Your father was a good man who got very sick when you were babies. He went to heaven before you could meet him." Andres gripped the tree bark until his knuckles were white. She had told them he was dead. In their innocent minds, they were meeting a stranger, not their father. "Do you think Daddy can see us from heaven?" Miguel asked, struggling to pronounce the words correctly. "I'm sure he can, sweetie. And I know he loves you both very, very much." The irony was suffocating. Andres was dying, but in his sons' minds, he had been dead for 6 years. He watched Miguel struggle to read a picture storybook, seeing the frustration and shame cloud the boy's face as he stumbled over simple words. As Elena saw him and motioned for him to come over, Andres realized the magnitude of his task. He not only needed to win his sons' hearts, he needed to resurrect himself from the dead. And he had to do it while his own body betrayed him, one failing synapse at a time. The headache that hit him as he walked toward his family was so intense that he nearly collapsed. Andres leaned against a park bench, forcing a smile, as Elena watched him with growing concern. The headache felt like molten metal behind his eyes. but he couldn't let his son see weakness. Not yet. "Are you okay?" Elena asked in a low voice as the boys played on the swings nearby. "Just tired," Andres lied, sitting down heavily. "Long day at the office." Over the next few weeks, their twice-a-week meetings became a delicate dance of small progress and painful setbacks. Andres learned to plan activities around his growing limitations. No more walking tours or physical games. Instead, he brought coloring books, simple puzzles, and picture storybooks that Miguel could handle without frustration. Santiago was the first to give in. During their fourth meeting, he approached Andres's bench with cautious curiosity. "Why do you always sit so much?" the boy asked with a 6-year-old's typical bluntness. "These old bones get tired easily," Andres replied, grateful for an excuse that wasn't entirely false. "You're not that old," Santiago observed. Then he surprised Andres by sitting down beside him. "My friend Tomas's daddy is older than you, and he plays soccer with us." Andres's chest tightened. Maybe we could read a story instead. Meanwhile, Miguel remained firmly distant, often hiding behind Helena or refusing to speak directly to Andres. His anxiety seemed to increase whenever Andres moved too fast or when his coordination failed, which happened more frequently. "He's very sensitive," Helena explained one afternoon as Andres struggled to open a juice box with trembling fingers. "Changes upset him, especially new people." "I understand," Andres said, though his heart ached as he watched Miguel retreat to the other side of the playground whenever he approached. By the 6th week, Santiago had started calling him Mr. Andres, and occasionally shared playground gossip or showed off school drawings. But Miguel continued to observe from a distance, his dark eyes filled with the same caution that haunted Helena's face. Andres knew time was running out. The coordination problems were becoming impossible to hide, and yesterday he had forgotten Santiago's name mid-conversation. Soon, even these precious stolen hours would be beyond his failing capacity. Part 3. The Truth Revealed and the Final Conversation. 3 weeks later, Helena called Andres with panic in her voice. "Miguel is having trouble at school. There's an emergency meeting with his teacher. Could you come? He might need all the support he can get." Andres found himself in the small classroom at PS, sitting next to Helena in child-sized plastic chairs. His vision was still blurred, and he had to grip the small desk to stay focused as Ms. Rodriguez explained the situation. "Miguel had a complete meltdown during reading hour," the teacher said softly. "He threw his book across the room and hid under his desk, crying. He kept saying he was too stupid, and everyone was laughing at him." Through the classroom window, Andres could see Miguel sitting alone in the principal's office, his small shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The sight made his chest constrict, with a pain that had nothing to do with his tumor. "Where is he now?" Andres asked, struggling to stand. Helena noticed how he grabbed the chair for support, her brow furrowing with concern. "The counselor is with him, but he won't talk to anyone," Ms. Rodriguez replied. Without thinking, Andres walked toward the office, his gait slightly unsteady. Helena followed close behind, ready to catch him if he stumbled. Through the glass door, they could see Miguel curled up in a ball on a beanbag chair, tears streaming down his face. Andres knocked softly and entered. "Hi, buddy." Miguel looked up, surprised to see him. "Mr. Andres, why are you here?" "Because sometimes," Andres said, carefully sitting on the floor beside the beanbag, "people who care about each other show up when things get tough." "I can't read good," Miguel whispered, his voice cracking. "All the other kids think I'm dumb." Andres's heart shattered. "You know what? I couldn't read good when I was your age either. The letters used to dance all over the page like they were playing tricks on me." Miguel's eyes widened. "Really? Really? But you know what I learned? Being different isn't the same as being dumb. Your brain just works in a special way." For the first time since Andres met him, Miguel moved closer. "Did kids laugh at you too?" "Sometimes. But I got help, and you will too." When Miguel finally allowed Andres to hug him while he sobbed, Elena watched from the doorway with tears in her eyes and a growing alarm at Andres's obvious confusion over which hallway led back to the parking lot. The drive home from Miguel's school was tense. Elena sat in the passenger seat of Andres's Lamborghini, her trained eye cataloging every symptom she had been subconsciously noticing for weeks. "Pull over," she said suddenly, when Andres struggled to remember which exit led to Brooklyn. "I'm fine," Andres insisted, though sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool autumn air. "Andres, I work in radiology. I see brain scans every day." Her voice was clinical now, stripped of emotion. The headaches, the coordination problems, the memory lapses, the way you grab things for balance, these are not symptoms of stress. Andres's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "You're overreacting. Pull the car over, now!" He stopped at a gas station, his movements jerky and uncertain. Elena turned to face him fully, her green eyes sharp with professional assessment. "Persistent cephalalgia, motor coordination dysfunction, episodic confusion," she recited in medical terminology. "How long have you been experiencing neurological symptoms?" "Elena, please!" "How long?" Her voice cut through his protests like a scalpel. Andres closed his eyes. "Since a few months, maybe longer." "Oh my God." Elena's clinical facade cracked slightly. "You've been around my children with an undiagnosed neurological condition. What if you had a seizure? What if you collapsed while holding Miguel?" "It's not that serious." "Bullshit." Elena's training kicked into full gear. The gradual onset of neurological decline in a 39-year-old man points to several possibilities, none of them good. Tumor, degenerative disease, autoimmune condition. "Stop," Andres whispered. "You will see a neurologist within 48 hours, Elena declared, her voice brooking no discussion. "You'll get a full workup, MRI, blood panels, everything. And until you do, you are not to go near Santiago and Miguel. You can't. You can't keep me from them. You watch me." Elena's eyes burned with protective fury. "I will not let you traumatize my children by collapsing in front of them. Get the tests, Andres. Find out what's wrong with you. Then we'll talk." As she got out of the car, hailing a taxi from her phone, Andres realized his time was running out faster than he had anticipated. Elena's medical instincts would eventually lead her to the truth. The question was, would she allow him to see his sons once she knew he was dying? 2 days later, Andres sat in the same neurologist's office where his world had first collapsed, watching Elena study his MRI films with the intensity of a detective examining crime scene evidence. Dr. Harrison had reluctantly agreed to include her in the consultation, given her medical background and relationship to the patient. The scans glowed against the viewing box like malevolent stars. Elena's face went through a spectrum of emotions, professional curiosity, growing alarm, and finally, a devastating understanding. "Glioblastoma multiforme," she whispered, tracing the jagged edges of the tumor with her finger. "Stage 4. "How long have you known this?" she asked the doctor. Dr. Harrison looked at Andres, who was slumped in his chair like a condemned man. 6 weeks. 6 weeks! Elena whirled around, her eyes blazing with fury. "You've known you were dying for 6 weeks and you didn't tell me? Elena, please!" "Please nothing." Her voice cracked like a whip. "I've been allowing you to spend time with my children while you lied to my face about having terminal brain cancer." Andres tried to stand, but his coordination betrayed him and he nearly fell back into the chair. I just wanted time with them. You needed to manipulate me." Elena's professional composure shattered completely. "Prognosis of 6 to 8 weeks. That means you have maybe 2 weeks left, right, Dr. Harrison?" The neurologist nodded grimly. "The tumor has grown significantly since the initial diagnosis. We're now talking days to weeks." Elena pressed her hands against her temples, pacing the small office like a caged animal. "This is insane. This is completely insane. You let me think you were stressed or overworked while your brain was literally dying." "I was afraid you would cut me off completely," Andres admitted, his voice barely audible. "I've already lost 7 years with them. I couldn't lose what little time I had left." Elena stopped pacing. Her chest heaved with emotion. For a long moment, she just stared at the man who had once destroyed her life and was now dying in front of her eyes. "If you want what time you have left with Santiago and Miguel," she said finally, her voice deathly quiet, "you will never lie to me about anything again. I decide how we handle this with the children. I decide when we tell them. And I decide how much time you have. Understood?" Andres nodded desperately. "Understood. And Andres?" Elena's green eyes were filled with tears she refused to shed. "I'm sorry you're dying, but I won't let you destroy my children the same way you destroyed me." Part 4. A Father's Last Gift. Elena's new rules were as strict as a military protocol. Visits were reduced to 1 hour, twice a week, always at her apartment where Andres could rest if needed. No more meetings in the park. His balance had become too unreliable. "Boys," Elena announced at their first indoor supervised visit, "Andres is going to be spending some quiet time with you. He's been feeling ill lately, so we need to keep activities calm." Santiago, now 8 weeks into knowing Andres, had developed a protective streak. "Will you be okay, Papa Andres?" he asked, the hybrid title coming out naturally. Andres's heart nearly stopped. "Papa Andres? Is that okay?" Santiago asked with uncertainty. "You're not like a regular papa, but you're not just Andres either." "It's perfect," Andres whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. Miguel remained huddled in the corner, with his picture storybooks, casting furtive glances but keeping his distance. The boy's anxiety seemed to increase whenever Andres moved too slowly or paused mid-sentence, which was happening more frequently. Andres had adapted his activities around his limitations. Board games replaced physical games. Reading together replaced walks. He had set up a small video camera in the corner, with Elena's permission, after he explained its purpose. "Santiago, can you look at the camera for a minute?" Andres asked during their third visit. "Why?" "I want to record some messages for you for when you're older, like when you graduate high school, or get married, or have your own children." Santiago scowled with 6-year-old logic. "Can't you just tell me then?" Elena intervened gently. "Andres wants to make sure his words are saved forever, sweetie." Between visits, Andres spent his remaining energy writing detailed letters for each child, instructions for Santiago on how to be a big brother, encouragement for Miguel on his struggles with reading, stories about the Montero family history they had never learned. During their 4th visit, Andres's speech began to be slightly slurred. Santiago noticed immediately. "Papa Andres, you sound funny." "Sometimes my mouth doesn't work as well as it used to," Andres explained simply. "Like Miguel with the reading?" "Exactly like that." From his corner, Miguel looked up for the first time that day, a flash of understanding crossing his young face. The following Tuesday brought an unexpected rain, trapping them all inside Elena's small living room. Andres sat at the kitchen table, his movements now noticeably slower and more deliberate. The tumor was progressing rapidly. His speech had become more labored, and his left hand trembled almost constantly. "I brought something special today," Andres announced, pulling a large art supply box from his bag with Elena's help. Santiago ran over immediately, but Miguel remained on the sofa, clutching his worn-out stuffed elephant. Over the past few weeks, the boy had begun to cast longer glances at Andres, his curiosity clearly fighting with his anxiety. "These are professional artist pencils," Andres explained to Santiago, his words slightly slurred, but understandable. "The kind that real artists use." "Can I try them?" Santiago asked excitedly. "Of course, that's why I brought them." As Santiago began drawing enthusiastically, Andres noticed Miguel had moved closer, his dark eyes fixed on the colored pencils with an unmistakable longing. "Miguel," Andres said in a low voice, "would you like to draw something?" The boy shook his head quickly, but didn't retreat to the sofa. "You know," Andres continued, his voice patient despite the effort speech required, "when I was your age, I loved to draw. My hands worked better with pictures than with words." Miguel's grip on his elephant loosened slightly. "Really? Really? Words were hard for me too. But pictures made sense." Elena watched from the kitchen doorway, ready to intervene if needed, but something in Andres's tone kept her silent. "I don't draw good," Miguel whispered, moving one step closer. "I bet you do," Andres said, sliding a blank sheet of paper across the table. "Want to try together?" For the first time in 2 months, Miguel walked up to Andres voluntarily. He climbed onto the chair beside him, his small body radiating nervous energy. "What should we draw?" Andres asked. "I don't know," Miguel said, picking up a green pencil with careful reverence. "How about a tree?" Everybody can draw a tree. As they worked side by side, Andres's trembling hand guiding Miguel's steady one. The silence was comfortable, broken only by the soft scratch of pencils on paper and the rain against the windows. "Andres," Miguel said suddenly, without looking up from his drawing. "Yes, buddy." "Mommy told us our daddy died before we were born." Andres's pencil stopped moving. Helena tensed in the doorway, but Andres looked into her eyes and nodded almost imperceptibly, giving her permission to navigate this minefield himself. "Miguel," Andres said slowly, choosing his words with a surgeon's precision. "Sometimes adults make very bad mistakes. Sometimes they hurt the people they love so badly that they have to go away. Like a timeout? Something like that, but a very long timeout." Miguel continued coloring, processing this information with 6-year-old logic. "Were you in timeout because you hurt Mommy?" "Yes," Andres whispered. "I hurt your mommy very, very badly, and I have regretted it every single day since then. But you came back." "I came back because I wanted to meet you and Santiago. Because even though I made terrible mistakes, I never stopped loving you." Miguel put down his pencil and looked directly at Andres for the first time. "You love us even though you didn't know us?" Andres's vision blurred with tears he fought to control. "I love you both more than all the stars in the sky, more than I ever knew it was possible to love anyone, even if I can't read good. Especially because you are exactly perfect just the way you are." Miguel studied Andres's face with the intensity that only children possessed. "Are you going to have to go back to heaven soon?" The question hung in the air like a sword. Andres looked at Elena, who had tears streaming down her face, then back at his son. "I might have to," Andres admitted. "But before I do, I want you to know something very important. Are you listening?" Miguel nodded solemnly. "You are smart and kind and brave. You are going to do amazing things in your life, and even though I might not be here to see them all, I will always, always be proud of you." For a moment they sat in complete silence. Then, to everyone's astonishment, Miguel slowly pulled his chair closer to Andres's. "Can I have a hug?" the boy asked in a low voice. Andres's heart nearly burst with joy and pain. "I would love that more than anything." When Miguel's little arms wrapped around his neck, Andres felt something fundamental shift inside his chest. For the first time since his diagnosis, he wasn't thinking about death or lost time or regrets. He was simply a father, hugging his son. Complete in that perfect moment. Part 5. The legacy of love and a second chance. The Montero family estate in Greenwich stood as a monument to old money, its Georgian columns casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. Andres gripped the steering wheel of his Lamborghini with both hands, Helena at his side, watching his every move with medical precision. In the back seat, Santiago and Miguel pressed their faces to the windows in awe. "Is this where you used to live?" Santiago asked in wonder. "A long time ago," Andres replied. His speech was more labored than yesterday. The tumor was advancing aggressively. He had partially lost vision in his left eye that very morning. Andres's parents, Isabel and Carlos Montero III, stood rigidly on the front steps like marble statues. At 75 respectively, they personified Connecticut aristocracy, dignified, controlled, and completely unprepared for the bombshell their dying son was about to drop. "Mother, father," Andres said as they approached, leaning heavily on Elena's arm, "I would like you to meet your grandsons." Isabel's composed facade cracked immediately. "Andres, what are you talking about?" "Santiago and Miguel," he continued, gently urging the boys forward. "They're 6 years old. They're mine." Carlos studied the boys with the keen eye of a man accustomed to evaluating bloodlines. The Montero family features were unmistakable. The strong chin, the intelligent brown eyes, the way both boys carried themselves with unconscious confidence. "This is impossible," Isabel whispered. "You never mentioned it." "There's a lot I never mentioned," Andres cut in. His voice was growing weaker. "But we don't have time for long explanations. I'm dying, and these children need a family." The next hour was a delicate dance of shock, denial, and gradual acceptance. Isabel, despite her initial bewilderment, found herself drawn in by Santiago's precocious questions about the family portraits that adorned the walls. Carlos, a pragmatist at heart, was already calculating the legal implications of posthumous paternity claims. "The legal complexities are staggering," Carlos admitted privately to Andres and Elena in his study. "Without established paternity, without your name on the birth certificates. That's why I brought this," Andres said, pulling out a thick legal document. "My lawyer has been working 24/7. Acknowledgement of paternity through my will, with DNA verification to follow. It's all arranged." Elena watched this with mixed emotions. Part of her was grateful for the financial security these people could provide for her sons. Another part resented how easily wealth could solve problems that had plagued her for years. "The trust funds are structured for long-term growth," Andres's lawyer, David Chen, explained as he joined them. "Education expenses covered through graduate school. Miguel's therapy fully funded. Housing allowances that adjust with inflation." "You have thought of everything," Elena said quietly. Andres turned to her with eyes that held a lifetime of regret. "I'm trying to. I can't give them their childhood back, but I can give them their future." Meanwhile, in the garden, something magical was happening. Isabel had moved past her initial shock and was showing the boys her prized rose garden. Santiago bombarded her with questions about plant names and growing seasons, while Miguel, emboldened by yesterday's breakthrough with Andres, actually spoke directly to his grandfather about the koi fish pond. "They have spirit," Carlos observed to Andres through the window. The one with the reading problems, Miguel. He reminds me of you at that age. The same determination hidden behind uncertainty. He's going to be extraordinary, Andres said. His words slurred more noticeably. They both will be. By evening, the legal documents were signed, witnessed, and notarized. DNA samples were collected for posthumous verification, a morbid but necessary step. The boys would inherit not just money, but a legacy, a family name, and grandparents who already showed signs of a fierce protective love. As they prepared to leave, Isabel pulled Elena aside. "I know we haven't had any kind of relationship," the older woman said carefully. "And I know my son hurt you terribly, but those boys are Montero now. That means something in this family." "What does it mean?" Elena asked. "It means they will never want for anything. An education, opportunities, support, whatever they need. And it means you are family too, whether you like it or not." On the drive back to Brooklyn, Santiago was full of excitement about his new grandparents, while Miguel sat in quiet processing of the day's events. Andres could barely keep his eyes open. The day's exertion had sapped what little energy he had left. "Papa Andres," Miguel said in a low voice as they stopped in Elena's neighborhood. "Yes, buddy," he labored. "Are Grandma Isabel and Grandpa Carlos going to take care of us when you go to heaven?" The question pierced Andres's heart. "They are going to help take care of you, but your mommy will always be the most important person." "Good," Miguel said with a 6-year-old's finality. "I like them, but I love mommy more." As Elena helped Andres out of the car, his legs nearly gave out completely. Time was running out faster than anyone had anticipated. 2 weeks after the visit to the Montero estate, Andres could no longer walk without assistance. The wheelchair Elena had reluctantly agreed to rent sat in her living room like an unwelcome guest, its chrome rails catching the afternoon light that filtered through their small windows. "Boys, Andres is here," Elena called softly, helping him transfer from the car to the wheelchair with practiced efficiency. Her radiology training had taught her basic patient care, but nothing had prepared her for watching the father of her children fade before her eyes. Santiago ran to greet them, but stopped short when he saw the wheelchair. His young face went through confusion, concern, and a heartbreaking attempt at normalcy. "Hi, Papa Andres," he said carefully. "How come you need that chair?" "My legs. They don't work so good anymore," Andres managed, his speech now significantly impaired. The simple sentence required a tremendous effort, and Elena could see the exhaustion already creeping into his features. Miguel appeared in the doorway, his stuffed elephant clutched tightly against his chest. Since his breakthrough 3 weeks ago, he had grown more affectionate with Andres, but the wheelchair clearly frightened him. "Is it going to hurt you?" Miguel whispered, approaching slowly. "No, it doesn't hurt me. It helps me. Like glasses help people see better." Elena had set new protocols, 30-minute visits maximum, constant supervision, and immediate interruption if Andres showed signs of confusion or distress. She had also moved all breakable objects out of his reach, after Andres had knocked over a lamp during their last visit, his spatial awareness increasingly compromised. "What are we doing today?" Santiago asked, sitting cross-legged on the floor beside the wheelchair. Andres fumbled in the bag hanging from his chair's armrest, his movements slow and deliberate. "I brought the video camera," he said, each word requiring visible effort. "Like making movies?" Santiago's eyes lit up with excitement. "Sort of. Want to help me record some special messages?" Elena set up the camera on its tripod, while Andres composed himself. She had discussed this plan with him yesterday. Final video messages for each boy to receive at important life milestones. Graduations, weddings, the birth of their own children, words from beyond the grave to guide them through moments he would never witness. "Santiago first," Andres said, gesturing for his son to sit next to the wheelchair. The recording session was both beautiful and heartbreaking. Andres, despite his deteriorating condition, managed to muster a remarkable clarity for his oldest son. "Santiago, if you're watching this, you're probably graduating high school," Andres began, his words carefully spaced. "I want you to know how proud I am. You were always the brave one, the protector. Take care of Miguel. But remember, you don't have to carry the whole world. And Santiago, your mommy, she is the strongest person I have ever known. Listen to her." When it was Miguel's turn, the boy carefully climbed onto Andres's lap. He was no longer afraid of the wheelchair. "Miguel, my sweet boy," Andres whispered to the camera. His voice was getting weaker. "If you're watching this, maybe you're struggling with reading again. I want you to know, different doesn't mean broken. Your brain works in beautiful ways. You feel things deeply. That is a gift. The world needs people who see with their hearts. And Miguel, those words that are hard now, you will find the ones that matter most someday." Midway through Miguel's recording, Andres's speech became more labored. Elena noticed his left eye beginning to drift, a sign that the tumor was affecting his motor control centers. "Maybe we should stop," Elena suggested softly. "No," Andres insisted with a surprising firmness. "I need to finish." But as he tried to continue, his words became garbled. Then they stopped completely. For a terrifying moment, he stared blankly at the camera, confusion clouding his features. "Andres!" Elena called out. But he abruptly turned his head to look at her, as if seeing her for the first time. Santiago jumped up, fear flashing across his young face. "What's wrong with Papa Andres?" "Sometimes his brain gets confused," Elena explained calmly, though her heart pounded. "Just like sometimes computers freeze up." Within minutes, Andres's clarity returned, but the episode had shaken everyone. Miguel had retreated to his corner, while Santiago stayed protectively close to him. "I'm fine," Andres assured them, though his voice barely rose above a whisper. "I just need to rest now." As Elena helped him transfer back to the car, Andres gripped her hand with a surprising strength. "How much longer?" she asked him in a low voice. "Dr. Harrison thinks maybe a week, 2 at the most." Elena closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decisions she had never imagined she would have to make. "Do you want us to tell them?" "Not yet. Let them remember me talking. Not just dying." That night, after the boys were asleep, Elena played back the video recordings. Andres's deterioration was visible even within the 30-minute span, his speech progressively more labored, his coordination failing in real time. But his love for his sons shone through every stumbled word, every labored breath. These imperfect, heartbreaking recordings would be the last gifts he could give them. The call came at 3:23 a.m. on a Thursday. Elena woke up to the insistent buzzing of her phone, knowing immediately what it meant. She had been expecting this call for days, watching Andres deteriorate with each visit until yesterday, when he could barely keep his eyes open for more than a few minutes. "Ms. Reyes, this is Dr. Harrison at Mount Sinai. Andres Montero asked me to call you. It's time." Elena closed her eyes, feeling a strange mix of sorrow and relief. "How long?" "Hours, maybe a day or 2, at the most. He's been asking for the children." The hospital room felt like a sanctuary of silent reverence when Elena arrived with Santiago and Miguel that afternoon. Andres lay propped up against white pillows, his once powerful frame now frail and diminished. The man who had commanded boardrooms and built skyscrapers could barely lift his head, but his eyes lit up the moment he saw his sons. "You are my boys," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the soft beeping of the monitors. Santiago went to the bedside first, his 8-year-old face serious with an understanding beyond his years. "Hi, Papa Andres. Are you very sick?" "Very sick," Andres confirmed softly. "But not in pain, just tired." Miguel hung back at first, overwhelmed by the sterile hospital environment and the tangle of wires connected to Andres. Elena carefully lifted him, seating him in the chair beside the bed, where he could see his father without being frightened by the medical equipment. "Is this where you're going to go to heaven?" Miguel asked, with the direct honesty that only children possess. Andres's eyes filled with tears. "Maybe, buddy. But right now, I'm just happy you're here." For the next hour, they spoke in simple, gentle sentences. Andres asked about school, about their favorite games, about anything that would keep his sons talking. His speech was labored and often punctuated by long pauses, but every word was precious. "Santiago," Andres said slowly, "you're going to be an incredible big brother. Take care of Miguel, okay?" "I already do," Santiago replied solemnly. "I help him read. Good boy." "And Miguel?" Andres turned his head slightly, his coordination requiring a huge effort. "Keep drawing. Keep seeing the world with your beautiful eyes." Elena had brought the art supplies, and both boys settled into comfortable positions around the bed, Santiago on one side holding Andres's right hand, Miguel carefully coloring beside his father's left arm. The scene was both heartbreaking and perfectly natural, as if they had been doing this their whole lives. "Tell us about when you were little," Santiago asked, squeezing Andres's fingers gently. Andres's voice grew softer as he shared fragmented memories. Climbing trees in Central Park, building forts with sofa cushions, the way his grandmother made animal-shaped pancakes. Simple stories that painted pictures of a childhood both boys could connect with. "Did you have trouble reading too?" Miguel asked, looking up from his drawing. "Yes." "The letters jumped all over the page, like they were playing hide-and-seek. But you got better?" "I got different. I found my own way. You will too." Isabel and Carlos Montero arrived in the early evening, bringing with them an air of dignified grief. The boys had grown comfortable with their grandparents in recent visits, and their presence seemed to bring peace to Andres. "Children," Isabel said softly, "will you show Grandpa Carlos your drawings while Grandma talks with your papa?" As the boys moved toward the window area with Carlos, Isabel approached the bed. Her composed exterior finally cracked as she looked at her dying son. "I'm so sorry, Andres," she whispered. "We should have known about them sooner. We should have been there." "They're here now," Andres responded with a tremendous effort. "That's what matters. Take care of them. And Elena, she's extraordinary." "We will, I promise." As the day wore on, Andres's periods of consciousness grew shorter, but each time he opened his eyes, his gaze sought out his sons. Santiago had appointed himself the official handholder, maintaining gentle contact even when Andres dozed off. Miguel had created an elaborate piece of art with stick figures labeled Papa, Mommy, Santiago, and Miguel, standing under a rainbow. "Look," Miguel said in a low voice during one of Andres's lucid moments. "It's our family." Andres studied the drawing with fierce concentration, memorizing every crayon stroke. "It's perfect," he managed to say. "All of you are perfect." That night, when visiting hours ended, saying goodbye felt different, more final. Santiago seemed to understand this instinctively. "Papa Andres," Santiago said, leaning close to the bed. "I love you. I love you too, Santiago. So much." Miguel, emboldened by his brother's example, carefully climbed onto the bed for one last hug. "I love you, Papa Andres. Are you going to watch me from heaven?" "Every single day," Andres promised, his voice cracking. "Every single day." Elena stayed until midnight, watching Andres sleep restlessly. The rise and fall of his chest was becoming more labored, and she knew that maybe tomorrow wouldn't come for him. When she finally kissed his forehead goodbye, he stirred slightly. "Elena, I'm here. Thank you for letting me love them. Thank you for coming back," she whispered through tears. At 4:23 a.m., Andres Montero died peacefully in his sleep, surrounded by flowers from his children and pictures they had drawn for him. His last conscious thought had been of two little boys calling him Papa Andres, and the woman who had given him the greatest gift of all, a chance at redemption. Part 6. Happily ever after. Autumn leaves crunched under small feet as Santiago and Miguel walked hand in hand down the winding paths of Woodlawn Cemetery. At 8 years old, Santiago had grown into the protective role Andres had envisioned, while Miguel, now more confident, carried a fresh drawing in his free hand. "Remember to speak up," Elena reminded them gently, adjusting the collar of Miguel's jacket. The therapy sessions Andres had funded were working miracles. Miguel's reading had drastically improved, and his confidence was blossoming with every small victory. Andres's headstone was elegant in its simplicity. "Andres Montero, beloved father, every day." The boys had chosen those final words themselves, remembering his promise to watch them from heaven. "Hi, Papa Andres," Santiago said, sitting cross-legged on the grass with practiced ease. "Miguel learned how to read a whole book all by himself this week." Miguel smiled with pride, unfolding his latest piece of art. "I drew our new apartment. It has 3 bedrooms, and Mommy has her own bathroom now." Elena smiled, watching her sons chat with their father's grave, with the naturalness of children who had integrated loss into their understanding of love. The Montero Trust Fund had changed their lives. They had moved to a safe neighborhood in Park Slope. Miguel received twice-weekly therapy sessions, and both boys attended an excellent private school, where their unique needs were understood and nurtured. "Tell him about Grandma Isabel's visit," Elena prompted. "She took us to that fancy restaurant where they put the napkin in your lap," Santiago reported seriously. "And she said we're going to spend Christmas at the big house in Connecticut." "Grandpa Carlos is teaching me about fish," Miguel added. "The ones in his pond have names." Isabel and Carlos had embraced their unexpected grandsons with the fierce devotion of people who are given a second chance at family. What had started as a duty had become a genuine love. They attended school plays, remembered birthdays, and provided the kind of generational stability Elena had never imagined possible. "And Mommy has something to tell you too," Santiago said, the mischief of an 8-year-old dancing in his eyes. Elena felt her cheeks warm. "That's private, Santiago." "But Papa Andres should know about David," Miguel interjected. "He makes Mommy smile." David Chen, Andres's former lawyer, had stayed in their lives initially to manage the trust arrangements. Somewhere between legal meetings and school conferences, a gentle friendship had blossomed into a sweet romance. Elena had resisted any romantic feelings for months, unsure if moving on meant betraying Andres's memory. "He's very kind," Elena said finally, addressing the headstone directly. "He makes the kids laugh, and he understands our story. I think you would approve." The wind whispered through the oaks above them, and Miguel looked up hopefully. "Is Papa Andres saying yes?" "Maybe," Elena said softly. As they prepared to leave, Santiago stood up and placed his small hand on the headstone. "Papa Andres, I've been thinking about what I want to be when I grow up." "What's that, sweetie?" Elena asked. A doctor, like the ones who tried to help you. Maybe I can learn how to fix brains so other daddies don't have to go to heaven so soon. Elena's breath caught in her throat. At 8 years old, Santiago was already showing signs of the Montero family determination, channeling loss into purpose, pain into healing. 15 years later, Dr. Santiago Montero stood in his white coat in front of a conference hall full of medical students at Johns Hopkins, his presentation screen showing images of brain scans that would have been terribly familiar to his family. Glioblastoma multiforme remains one of our greatest challenges, he explained to the rapt audience. But recent advances in immunotherapy and targeted gene therapy offer unprecedented hope, because sometimes a few weeks can change everything. In the front row, Miguel sat with a sketchbook. His childhood struggles with words were now transformed into a gift for medical illustration. His detailed drawings helped his brother's research team visualize complex neural pathways in ways traditional imaging couldn't capture. After the lecture, the brothers walked across campus together toward Santiago's lab. At 23, Santiago had fast-tracked his medical career with a singular focus, while Miguel had found his calling creating medical illustrations that bridged the gap between scientific complexity and human understanding. "Mom called," Miguel said, scrolling through his phone. "David is officially proposing next month." "It's about time," Santiago smiled. "They've been together longer than Andres and Mom ever were." "Do you think Papa Andres would be okay with that?" Santiago stopped walking, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I think Papa Andres would want Mom to be happy, and I think he'd be proud that we still talk about him, like he's part of our decisions." That evening, they drove to Brooklyn to join Elena and David for dinner. The apartment was filled with the comfortable chaos of a blended family. David's teenage daughter, Laura, from his first marriage, had become the sister the boys never knew they wanted. "Santiago got another research grant," Elena announced proudly during dessert. "The Montero Foundation is backing a 3-year study," Santiago explained to David. "Grandma Isabel insisted they fund brain tumor research specifically. She said that's what family foundations are for," Miguel added, "to take care of people the way families are supposed to." After dinner, they gathered around old photo albums that Elena had finally been able to look at without crying. Pictures of Andres during his brief time with the boys filled the pages, in a wheelchair, but smiling, reading stories with Miguel, building block towers with Santiago. "You know what I remember most?" Santiago said softly, studying a photo of Andres helping him with a puzzle. "How he listened, he really, really listened, even when talking was hard for him. He made me feel smart," Miguel added. "Even when I couldn't read the words, he made me feel like my thoughts mattered." Elena wiped away tears she no longer tried to hide. "He would be so proud of both of you, the men you've become, the way you take care of each other." "We learned from the best," Santiago said, squeezing his mother's hand. Outside, snow began to fall softly against the windows. Tomorrow, they would visit Andres's grave again, as they had every month for 15 years. They would tell him about the latest breakthrough in Santiago's research, about Miguel's new commission to illustrate a children's book about learning differences, about Elena's engagement to a man who honored Andres's memory by loving his family well. And somewhere in the space between memory and hope, Andres Montero's legacy continued. Not in buildings or bank accounts, but in 2 extraordinary young men who had learned that love could transcend time, that redemption was always possible, and that sometimes the most profound gift a father could give his children was the courage to live fully, even in the shadow of loss. The boy who couldn't read had become an artist whose work helped heal others. The protective big brother had dedicated his life to ensuring no family would lose a father the way they had. And the woman who had been broken by betrayal had learned to love again. Surrounded by the family Andres' last few weeks had made possible. In the end, 6 weeks had changed everything.